Okay. Okay, we're all here in our various quadrants. Exciting. Okay, so hello and welcome to our fourth and final discussion with the MKS Cares Here to Listen panel series. And today's topic is standing up for yourself and each other. So for everyone who is joining us again in the invisible auditorium, welcome back. Thank you so much for being with us. And for our panelists sitting here up front and center in their quadrants, welcome, welcome. I'm gonna introduce all of you, and when I do, please raise your hand so that the attendees can recognize who you are. So first and foremost, we have Mary-Justine Todd, who I affectionately and everyone calls MJ. She is the founder and executive director of Shamsaha, which is the first and only domestic and sexual violence crisis response program in the Middle East. We have Laila Saif, who is a hypnotherapist, life coach, and co-owner of Illuminations, one of the UAE's largest and leading well-being platforms for holistic healing, mental well-being, and personal growth. And finally, we have Hadil, who also works at Illuminations as a translator and is also a survivor of domestic violence. I'm really humbled and in awe of your bravery for coming forward and speaking about your firsthand experiences today. So I really greatly thank you and appreciate it. Before we unpack our topic, I want to remind everyone what this initiative is and why we are here. So MKS Cares is Here to Listen, and it's an initiative created by MKS Jewellery, wanting to create a safe space for us to come together to talk about meaningful things in light of meaningful jewelry as well. The brand is founded on the pillars of self-expression and taking control of your narrative and empowering others to tell their stories as well. The brands that we have united support our society's mental, emotional, spiritual well-being, as well as our rights as human beings. And through these talks, we are looking at the bigger feelings and themes of this moment during COVID-19 and speaking to people who can help us approach them in new ways. And if you want to find out more about the initiative, you can go on to mksjewellery.com. From there, you can go to MKS Cares and all the information is there for you. All right, so the main talking point for today, standing up for yourself and each other. But to arrive to this point, we have to go back to why we need to do that in the first place. How have circumstances led us to needing to advocate for ourselves and each other? What's going on out there? Because during COVID-19, a lot of issues that exist in the world have been magnified and are getting worse, unfortunately. And one of those issues is domestic violence. And as we have turned to social distancing and home isolation to protect ourselves from coronavirus, for a lot of people, the bigger danger is actually at home. A lot of gender dynamics and roles are at play here, and they're giving rise to where we are today. Now, before I dive into the questions, I just want to put out a very necessary disclaimer. Statistically, women are the victims of domestic violence. So we'll be speaking to women predominantly as the victims and or survivors, but later on we'll talk about men and how they have been helping to improve the situation, because this issue affects both genders, and I want it to be a fair assessment. So this is not a man-hating exercise at all. It's not about defeating the problem like a witch hunt. It's about looking at the stats and statistics and the facts productively and looking at the root causes. So I want to start off by asking MJ, how do you define a gender role, and what does that look like? What do we understand of it?
Well, I think it's a bit confusing. The term itself is a bit academic and it's not always obvious. But basically, a gender role is a set of behaviors, maybe certain belief systems or expectations that are widely and largely accepted by those around us. And by those around us, I mean even in our private sphere, in our family life, in our social cultures. And these expectations are assigned to individuals based on their gender or the sex of the person presenting. Essentially, to just break it down, they are a set of, it's an unspoken agreement or understanding about how we are supposed to act in the world around us, depending on our gender.
Yeah. And a dynamic, that's something quite fluid. How does that intersect into a gender role?
Well, dynamic by nature is something that's evolving, that's moving, that's fluid. So to define it would be quite difficult. But to understand what it is just to understand that a dynamic exists between one or more of a thing, one or more of a person. Mm-hmm. So a gender dynamic would be the fluid, the movement, the relationship between men and women, between two genders.
Mm-hmm. How do the roles that we have been born into shape the outside culture? How are those interchangeable? And this is open to everybody.
I mean, I'll give it a go for that. There's definitely no right or wrong. I mean, sometimes naturally men and women tend to like to do certain things. For example, a lot of men, there's also that stereotype that men is the provider, the protector, the woman is the one taking care of the house. And we're not saying these norms are wrong or bad, as long as people fall into it naturally. When it becomes enforced, as in when a woman says, hey, by the way, I would like to work, or I would not like to marry this man, and then there's power, there's force, there's violence. Here we do have an issue. If both parties are happy and naturally falling into that and harmonious, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So in our conversations today, again, as you said, we'll give it a holistic perspective, and we're mainly talking about ensuring that there is harmony in people choosing how they want to live their life. And if a woman or if a man says, hey, I, for example, want to be a stay-at-home dad, that's okay, right? As long as the partner as well is right. So as long as nothing is enforced and there's no power or violence in approaching it, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes, I totally agree. I would like to say that, there's this common misunderstanding that, to be a feminist, you can't be a stay-at-home mom, for example. But that's absolutely silly, because if you describe me, one of the biggest feminists on the planet, like I do a lot of the things, and so does my husband, that fall under stereotypical gender roles. But it's all done by choice without any coercion.
Well, that was my point next. When does it become problematic?
In my experience, actually, it becomes problematic when you get forced, because in my culture, you cannot say no to a man whatsoever. If he asks you to do something, you have to do it. You cannot say no. If you say no, then something is wrong with you. This is how they take it.
I think that it can become problematic, for example, when a masculine role evolves into hypermasculinity. For example, like a common male role, a common gender role for men might be dominance or assertiveness, right? But then when that becomes exaggerated to the point of oppression, control, or abuse of those around him, obviously, then we have a problem. And conversely, at the same time, when a feminine gender role becomes hyper feminine, then she runs the risk of being extremely submissive, self-defeating, and unable to stand up for herself.
When does that move into the global violence against women? When do these societal perceptions of appropriate gender roles contribute to that, and how does that play out?
So I don't want to dominate the conversation because I have an answer for all of these. So I'll let someone else speak if they would like, because then I can also add to it later.
I can actually say when it starts to lead to death or suicide. This is when it becomes, because so many women around the world, they feel like they're nothing. They don't have a say in anything. So I'm not worth it. So it leads to suicidal thoughts. And the other part is they get abused for saying no, that I want this, so no. Then it becomes abusive, so it leads to death.
I would say it's problematic way before that stage. Like that stage is something that we don't even want to do. That's the end. That's the complete failure of all of our systems if it gets to that stage. And the issue is in our culture, like if we talk, for example, about men who are abusive, in our culture, sometimes men having dominance over his family is straightly going to how man he is, right? So when he's unable to force whatever order, because he was brought up in that way, that this is his role, he's a man, he's responsible. And when he's faced with a situation at the home where he's unable to enforce it, then that's directly my ego. I'm not man enough. I'm ashamed in front of the world. I'm not a man. So that link of his manhood, of his ego with the enforcement of certain norms, that is the huge mistake, because in that point, it's just survival that kicks in. It's just his ego. He just loses control. It's like, let me save the situation. I need to prove that I'm a man. So there are definitely a lot of subtle concepts and subtle beliefs that gets into our psyche. And again, Hadil, you mentioned this, like part of the culture is that you're raised that you're not allowed to say no, you have to say yes. So in a lot of situations with abuse, a lot of women feel it comes into their belief systems, I'm unworthy, or it becomes the norm of this is how life is, and it becomes something accepted. So really getting to that point and say, actually, no, this is not the norm. Every human being deserves to have a peaceful life. Every human being, we are given by God the freedom of free will. That's what differentiates us from animals and from other creatures. So if we were given this divine right of free will, who's anyone else to convince us that we don't have it?
And I think, like you say, Laila, it's really easy to become convinced because global acceptance of these common gender roles, as we're all describing here, they're manifested in everything that we see around us, right? Like from TV to movies to advertisements to real life scenarios, you know, that play out every single day. But when society implicitly accepts that one gender should have more power than the other, it becomes very, very easy for someone's role to evolve into this unhealthy, exaggerated role, right? If a man is becoming, you know, really controlling and aggressive or abusive, this can really easily just slip through the fabric of our societal roles as we see them already existing, you know? At the same time, like women's like submissiveness can also just easily slip through there. And then when she does try to stand up for herself, then right there, she is in fact challenging those gender roles, right? Mm-hmm. So she's displaying power and speaking up. And so people don't like that when they go against the grain. So then this is when victim blaming and victim shaming becomes a part of it as well.
Well, then how does someone in the minority who has all the right views, has sort of challenged assumptions, tested themselves, have come out the other side, but everyone around them, like the cultural messaging, you know, you can't move through this world without seeing the objectification of women in advertising, in films, even if you can see it and you can rise above what that actually means. And it's nothing what they're trying to communicate. You know, a pair of shoes is communicated through a highly sexualized image when actually the shoe is really not the crux of the image. It's a woman's sexuality. If you can see that objectively and see what's wrong with it, and you have the right tools and understanding, how can that precipitate to others? I mean, I know it sounds like you're trying to move a mountain, but when you got it right, but everyone around you is still fundamentally so skewed in their views, how do you challenge that? How can you make that change?
Well, I would argue that there's very few of us on a regular basis all day long, every single day, that actually do see those and identify those things, because it is so normalized. Mm-hmm. Violence against women in the media is so common. I would ask everyone listening to go forward in the coming days and weeks and just look at, like you say, the advertisements, the movies that you're watching, and it's everywhere, but it's so normal that we don't see it. Furthermore, women are just human beings, right? Mm-hmm. They're just normal people that are subject to all the brainwashing and all of the media messaging that is around them. And in order to rise above that, they have to have been going intentionally out of their way to see or hear something, you know, something different. And honestly, I mean, I've made a career out of this, but if this wasn't my career, who has time to focus all of their attention and energy on this topic? People don't do that. They just live their lives. And so this messaging seeps into the way that we think about ourselves as well.
And as we live our lives right now, they're actually kind of flipped on their sides. We're not living our normal lives right now, and it's impacted the rise of domestic violence. What does it mean to be in a situation like this? What does it look like right now? I know, MJ, you probably have some on the ground intel in on this because of what the nature of what you do at Shamsaha, but why is it exacerbated now? Why? What's going on?
So the shelter in place and the restrictions that have been put into place on account of the pandemic have had, absolutely terrible effects on women who, first of all, were already experiencing abuse, and or women who maybe had not yet, but now it's beginning. This is because of a lot of reasons. First of all, there's increased stress, there's decreased resources, there's fear, there's a sense of a loss of power on the part of someone who normally does have power, right? A man. Mm-hmm. So when women are stuck at home, not only is the abuse potentially starting for the first time, because abuse often starts when someone feels a sense of a loss of their own power, but now if it's someone who's already been abused and living in a protracted abuse situation, now they can't escape. They can't go to work. They can't go to their friends. There's so many restrictions on them now that they just have to grin and bear it, basically. And so what I would say to many of those women who are in that position right now is that there are some tips and techniques to try to stay safe, even when you're living in an abusive home.
At Illuminations, what have you been doing to put in place for the most vulnerable people who are suffering right now?
We provide, I'll just add on first to a point that MJ just talked about. If someone or a man who's in peace with himself and who feels manly and masculine and strong will not have to get to a point where he gets engaged into any sort of violence. However, in our cultures, we tell little boys, you're strong, don't cry, don't, if you're sad, just like man up. And this gives men absolutely no outlet to vent out their emotions, or if they've been through any sort of a sensitive or sexual abuse growing up, they carry that deep within their souls and unable to tell anyone about it. And it just fosters and builds into frustration, and it just manifests itself. As she said very correctly, they feel weak. So what they try and do, engaging in that activity, they literally take your power. So time after time, the woman feels weaker and weaker because her strength is taken by the guy, and the man would feel stronger and stronger, engaging that, trying to take it from an outside source. So first of all, for the men out there, we're saying we have a safe, confidential, safe space, and a lot of therapists and specialists who would help you reclaim your own power and strength from whatever situation that got you to lose it in the first place. Now, for the women, number one is to work or give them that platform to work on their beliefs, to shift that belief that is not okay, to retrieve back all of their strength that were lost during these incidents, at least energetically or emotionally, or even the emotion of feeling helpless. So we give them that platform to regain every lost part they've had along the way. I mean, Hadil has done a few of her healings, and today I see her actually here on the platform. So it's just amazing. However, what I would love to see, and I'm grateful and thankful for this panel, is to have something like a crisis space, because sometimes all the healing and the reflecting phase happens after the event, but instantly when it happens, you need instant support. And this is what we currently lack in the UAE, and we would love to partner or like to make the word out. So amazing, Shamsaha, what you guys do.
MJ, can you speak a little bit to what Shamsaha does specifically and why this nuanced bridge and buffer between the incident and longer term strategies and therapies is so important?
Well, like Laila said, the therapy and the counseling that happens, for long-term healing typically happens in the weeks, months, and even years following violent incidents. But in fact, what the public health research shows is that the most predictive factor of whether or not someone will develop post-traumatic stress disorder is in fact how they are treated in the immediate 24 hours following the incident. So for anyone who doesn't know, PTSD is the psychological ailment, the psychological disease, if you will, that people develop when they go through a trauma. It's typically attributed to soldiers who return home from war. But actually, victims of domestic violence face PTSD. They get PTSD at even higher rates than soldiers returning from war. So when you have a crisis program available, you substantially reduce the likelihood that a woman will develop PTSD following abusive and traumatic incidents like this, simply by being there immediately following the incident. So what Shamsaha does is provides exactly that. We serve as this really important bridge between the critical traumatic incident and the services to come following thereafter, whether it's counseling or therapy or legal or economic support, whatever it is. We operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, both in English and Arabic. We have 2 telephone hotlines. We will provide the emotional support either on the phone or face-to-face for anyone who calls and requests it and needs it. But additionally, there's a lot of logistic support that goes into that. So we may accompany a woman to the police station to help her file a police report. She doesn't know how, she doesn't know where it is, she's scared, she doesn't speak the language, she's alone, she doesn't have a car, whatever it is. We will get her to the police station. We will go there with her and we'll hold her hand through the whole process. Maybe she needs to go to the hospital. Maybe she's been injured. We will get her to the hospital. We will meet her there. We will hold her hand to make sure that she gets the care that she needs. Again, just providing that immediate support following the critical incident. Maybe we go to the courts with her if she's going through legal processes. And then in the days and weeks following the critical incident, we also offer follow-up casework care to then connect them with, for example, organizations such as Illuminations, so they can get long-term therapy and long-term support.
So you created an integrated system that perhaps is lacking right now.
Yeah, so actually what UNHCR recommends, UNHCR and UNODC both recommend that in order to provide the best care for victims of abuse and victims of crime, that you have to have all the systems integrated, right? From the crisis to the counseling, to the legislative, to the judicial, to the medical, to the criminal justice system. And right now we don't have those systems integrated, but unfortunately, this is also a bit out of my control. However, having a crisis advocate with the victim will ensure that there is one link to create that network for all the services that the victim might need. So she does not have to go it alone. She does not get told from one agency, go talk to these people, and they say, go talk to these people, because we're there with her the whole time, linking it all together.
Yeah. If a victim or survivor of violence knows that there is a solidified network where they can seek help, does that drastically increase the likelihood of reporting an incident?
Well, what we know is that one of the reasons that women don't report is because of negative interactions that they've had in the past when making attempts, whether that's with the police or with other family members or with neighbors. If they get shut down, if they have a negative experience, they won't do it again. They won't ask for help again. Yeah. So if can be there to prevent any negative experiences, the idea is that they will then keep seeking their own strength, as Laila was saying, and support, because we also know that on average it takes 6 to 10 attempts to leave an abusive partner. So just because she comes to us now, it may not be the last time she needs help. Hadil, perhaps you have some comments on that too. I saw your expression.
Yeah. Actually, I'm one of the people who actually seek for help many times, but every time that happened, I didn't get any help. And every time I did ask for help, I was going back home and getting like more beaten up, to the point that for a day I was gonna be, it was like a life-death situation many of the times. So actually what I think is stopping the people is the fear of getting back in there. If I'm seeking for help, I need to make sure that I'm going and finding it there, not going and returning back to the same person who's gonna beat me up to death.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a really challenging situation because for someone like you, for example, or other women that have been in your shoes before, whether it's family violence or intimate partner violence, the idea of totally upending their life, moving, having a whole new family network, a whole new social network, this is really scary and it's a huge decision. I mean, honestly, who wants to do that? Nobody wants to do that. What we want is for things to just be better.
Yeah.
Sadly, it happened like that overnight.
Actually, the message that I'm trying to tell everyone is that you don't need to give up on yourself, even if they return you many times. Don't give up on yourself. Even if it's a life-death situation, you're still alive, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the people
Good
who
job.
actually, I'm one of the people who actually went there many times, and I got beaten up many times. And I told you, most of the times it wasn't just beaten up or just like a small thing. It was mostly a life-death situation, and I guess I saw it many times. So every time that I went home, and I thought that, okay, that's it, I'm not going there anymore. I'm not gonna lie to anyone. It's really hard. It's tough. It's tough to stand up on your feet and say, no, I'm gonna do it again. In my experience before, like I don't know, 3-4 years ago, I tried suicide. I literally tried it because I found like there is no point of me living. I'm getting tortured most of the times. So at that time when I did it, and I realized that this is not how I'm supposed to live. I'm a loving person. I'm a good person. I'm not a bad person. I did hurt people in the past. I'm not gonna deny that. I did it as a react because every time that I used to get hurt, it would affect me to the point that I want to hurt everyone else around me. So sometimes also feeling numb to the point that you're not even feeling pain makes you hurt yourself. So it's really bad and it's really hard. I'm not going to deny that. But every time you think about suicidal things, just think for a minute that you're worth it. Right. Nobody deserves to die whatsoever. Nobody. So everyone deserves to live and be happy. And I actually think that because in my experience, I was born as a person that I wasn't loved by my father, and my mom was beaten up to the point that she actually, I can say that she lost her brain while I was in a very young age because a beat on the head. She doesn't even remember who I am. So at a very young age, I had to take care of me and my mom and my sister, who was actually as well doesn't hear or talk. So I had to take care of them at the age of 12, 13. Mostly I live in the streets. But this doesn't mean that I have to stop fighting. I did stop fighting before, but that doesn't mean that I have to stop fighting now.
I mean, Hadil, it's very inspiring that you actually have the courage to come up and really just be vulnerable. And if just for the sake of everyone who's watching, Hadil is not a domestic abuse survivor. She's still in the situation and she's risking a lot by coming out today and talking about all of this. She's still, even though she's still in the same situation and she's quarantined in the same family home, she's still finding a place. I know that she found this hotel room and found this, and I'm like, I'm gonna speak up and I'm gonna reach out, because if I don't do this, how will I encourage the rest to speak up? Now, our main issue is we don't have this crisis place like Shamsaha here, where we could like place her in some other in another physical location. But it was just amazing. I remember we had like 2 healing sessions with Hadil, and then she came up with the idea saying enough is enough. And exactly the next day, the moment she decided this, Georgie, you called me for this conversation. And I'm like, amazing. It's like the universe is just waiting for her to say enough, I need to do something about it. And the platform just opened up for her. So I wish you all the best, and I wish you come out of the situation as soon as possible. Just make sure you take care of yourself, your safety first, and your health as well, not to put yourself in danger.
Hadil, I want to tell you that as much as you probably try to know this and probably try to tell yourself this, it's not your fault.
I know.
And there's nothing that you can do to change the behavior of somebody else. right? You can only manage your own behavior, which is actually what makes these crises so difficult. Because like I said earlier, you just want it to be better, but you can't change the behavior of someone else.
That was another point that I wanted to make. I think we're always so hell-bent on changing others, because knowing that if they change, that everything will be okay. Because you can see what good looks like, you can envision it, but it doesn't always happen that way. What do you say for people who try to change people but can't see that it's just not gonna happen? What's the alternative way to look at it?
If I may bring this back to a gender role. One of the gender roles that is common in this region.
Women will fix things, men. It's our role.
No, that is in this region. I mean, these common oppressive and submissive gender roles that I describe, exist globally. But something that's unique here is the almost comprehensively and almost total ban on like young women, unmarried, moving out and living by themselves. It's so uncommon. It almost never happens. And so someone, for example, that's still living in an abusive home, whether it's a family, a parental family, or a husband or a married family, to make that change, go out, get a job, get an apartment. This is a massive, massive shift from what's acceptable. So only by changing gender norms, right, can we actually then create pathways for women to make decisions so it's possible they take care of themselves. Like Hadil, you're obviously very smart, you're grown, but what does society say to you?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I do have this option, but the option that I don't have is how can I make sure that my mom and sister are safe? This is my only thing that I'm still stuck with. My mom is a person who's sick, even though she's sick and she has cancer, she has seizures, she has something in her brain that making the cells eat each other. I can't leave her there. Even like she's getting abused as well. My sister, who cannot talk and speak, she cannot talk, she cannot hear. Even though of that, she's still getting abused. So I cannot leave them. For me, I can leave in any minute. I can just transfer my visa and leave. But I cannot leave them in this situation, and yet I cannot find any help that I can get them out of there.
And this is when the systems need to be integrated, right? Government systems with substantial resources and power and authority need to be the ones that create these pathways, right? Not like small, nonprofit organizations that do the best they can, but we don't have the power to change like national policy, But it's women like you, Hadil and Laila, that need to advocate within the country for example, Shura Council members and members of Parliament to make these changes.
We're hoping that this is just not a panel conversation to get us busy during quarantine. We're really hoping that this platform literally puts the seed for that. I feel this is the start, and I feel it's about time. In the country, late Sheikh Zayed, and from a high-level support, there's a huge amount of support for women. However, unfortunately, it doesn't cascade down into the family structure. So even though sometimes you would have laws that are supportive, that will protect you as a woman, it's not integrated in our norms, it's not socialized properly, women don't know their right. So there's still a lot of gaps missing there that I'm hoping that this conversation will put the seed for.
That's right. I mean, go ahead.
What I was going to say to that point, Laila, there's one thing to have legislation in place, and that always sounds great because it's on a kind of national level and it kind of affects all, but then that doesn't necessarily trickle down to everyday people and the culture around us. So how can we, as everyday citizens, everyday advocates for ourselves and each other, break that silence? What is okay? What is not okay within the parameters that we are in? It's quite a big question, so we can unpack it with, first and foremost, how do you break the silence?
Love yourself. Love yourself. Just think that you're worthy. Then you'll understand that you have to stand up for yourself. You don't keep silent, even if you saw it in the streets, even if you're not the person who's getting abused. If you know someone who's getting abused, then stand up for them, even if it's not you. But if it's you, the person who's getting abused, just love yourself, because if you feel that you're not worth it, if you feel useless, if you feel like you're nothing, it's so pointless, to the point that you're gonna lead to yourself to many things that would make you unhappy, to suicidal thoughts. So what I'm asking is, just love yourself, stand up for yourself, go and talk and speak. Tell them, no, I need to help. Seek for it to the point that don't stop. Just keep seeking for your help. This is what I'm doing right now. I'm in I don't know if I'm gonna go home and be okay right now, but still I'm gonna do it.
If I could take the point back to the legislation just briefly, I would just like to say, alhamdulillah, Bahrain is a very progressive country, and it was actually one of the first and only countries in the entire Middle East to criminalize domestic violence. If you don't even have the law on your side, you've got nothing to stand on, right? So that's really the first step. Now, it's not the only step by any means, but it is the first step, because you can't make a report. Yeah. You can't file a claim against someone. You can't prosecute someone. You have absolutely no justification to seek retribution. You have no course of justice if we don't have the law on our side.
I believe that just to add a correction, I feel there is certain laws that do protect. However, they're not very much marketed, or they're not very much implemented. So for example, if you would go and say, I want to put a report, the person you'll be talking to will be like, oh, this is a family matter, just go back home. The law is there, but how do you make sure it's implemented?
I can actually tell you for certain that it is only Bahrain and Saudi Arabia who have actually criminalized violence against women, domestic violence, within their penal criminal code. And Bahrain, I might say, relative to Saudi Arabia, is doing quite progressive things here. So I think that there's legislation in place to protect against assault and to protect against certain type of morality sort of issues, but actual domestic violence doesn't exist. And even in Bahrain, sexual violence within a marriage does not exist. So a husband cannot rape a wife. And that's true for the whole region.
There's a lot of othering that takes place in the narrative around domestic violence. I think people acknowledge it, but they always see it as someone else's problem. Mm. How do we stop that and acknowledge the facts on the ground?
I would say, first of all, there's a lot of signs of domestic violence. Whether we are teachers or we see someone who's got any physical symptoms, we should reach out and ask if you're okay. And I remember interacting with Hadil, we sensed there's something not quite right, and then it helped her, giving that safe space for her to open up about her situation. Also, for everyone who might be on the panel, whether we are engaged, whether we are a victim or a perpetrator. For a perpetrator, I would say there's some anger within. Solve it, work on it. There's something that is bugging you, that is triggering you. And every time you engage in that violence, it will not solve it. You would feel, yes, I'll be fulfilled for 5-10 minutes. Let me go and make it harder. Maybe I would feel better. That does not solve your problem. We have a platform for you. For a woman, it gets into your psyche. It is not okay to be forced to not live the life that you want to live, the way you want to live it. It is not okay. None of it is your fault, as MJ said. Everyone deserves to be loved, deserves to be respected. And if you don't find it within your family, that's okay. There's a lot of love and respect that you can find elsewhere. Start with loving yourself by saying enough is enough, and never give up seeking help. We have therapists, we have people who are giving you, literally dedicating dedicating their lives to give you that emotional and mental support. Unfortunately, we don't have that legal system yet, but now we're speaking up. We're saying we need this, we need that help. So hopefully within the near future, something like this should or would shift.
How can we ensure that we advocate for, of course, ourselves first and foremost, but each other in COVID-19 when we are quarantined and the four walls are around us, and we can't rely on those traditional support systems that we've had, where we can go to a friend who we trust and we know that we can be safe there, or to a center, or to, you know, something like an organization like Shamsaha. What can we do now? It feels like we're in a bit of a hopeless situation because we can't actively action something because we're all held within.
Well, if I could answer that, and also at the same time sort of address one of the questions that a viewer typed in, is...
Oh, wait, let me read out the question. Which one are you looking at?
The second one. It's, I think, a follow-up to sort of their first question.
Sure. Should I go through both questions so we can answer them? Sorry, we're doing a bit of a Q&A right now. We're going to meld it all in together. So let me start off with the first question because it runs in with what we're talking about. What's the first step you should take if you identify a potentially abusive relationship? Can we just go back to what does that look like? MJ, we always talk about the signs and symptoms of an abusive relationship. So what is that? How do you identify it? And everybody.
Well, so first of all, I wanted to clarify a potentially abusive relationship among two other people that you know, or one that maybe you're in. So there's different signs, obviously. So if you're in a relationship that you think is potentially abusive, but you're not sure, like there's certain red flags to look out for. And the red flags can be really, really confusing. The red flags can look like love, right? Because if someone always wants to know where you're at, or someone really wants to be with you all the time, you know, and they're calling all the time. And in the beginning, especially when you're young, it's like, oh my God, like butterflies in your stomach, you know, like he loves me so much, but maybe this is actually control. You know, maybe this is actually a way to keep tabs on you and to always know what you're doing. Isolation from friends and family members is a really common tactic that abusers use. And so if you start to notice these things, you really need to identify that, wait, maybe this isn't love. Maybe it seems like love and it seems like he just really wants to be with me, but actually I think there might be more to it, you know. And then talk to someone like Laila, who can help you figure it out, you know? And if you see a friend or someone else who's in a relationship that you think might be abusive, and George, to go back to your question about how do you help in the time of COVID, well, unfortunately, it's all kind of the same, because you can't do very much for someone who's not yet ready to do something on their own. Right? So whether it's on Zoom or just talking or you're going to lunch, at the end of the day, the only thing you can do, and to be fair, the only thing that you should do, which I will explain, is to be there, be kind, and let the person know that when they are ready, you are their friend. And that doesn't mean like, if someone's abusing you, you come and tell me. Simply means to be with them. You plant the seed of trust, and when they're ready to take a step, they will. They will reach out. And you don't have to pressure them and you don't have to push them, because at the end of the day, in fact, if you do pressure them or you do tell them what they should be doing, what you're actually doing is exactly what the perpetrator of abuse is doing, which is taking away their power and assuming that they should not have decision-making authority over themselves, right? So always just being there and being nice, whether it's on Zoom or at lunch, is the only and the first thing you really should be doing.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times as friends, we feel this sense of heroism. We want to try and save the day and save our friends from falling into the gutter, so to speak. And it can be a little bit narcissistic if we're not thinking about what's right for them, because actually, do we really know what's right for them? They themselves know. Even if we think we can see it objectively with a clear bird's eye view, actually they themselves know. Even if they don't appear that they know what's best, they do. But we have to give them, as MJ we talk about all the time, the logistical information that they can empower themselves to make a decision that's right for them.
In fact, one of our most key tenets at Shamsaha is we never, ever, under any circumstance, we never give advice. We only give information. Because if I were to give you advice, not only would I be further taking away your power, but what I would be doing is pushing you away from me. Because if I'm a victim and I don't follow your advice, then I'm going to feel bad and I don't want you to know. So I'm not going to go back to you next time. And if I am a friend who is always constantly giving advice, and she's not listening, then I'm going to get compassion fatigue and I'm just going to not want to deal with it anymore. I want to step out the door because she doesn't listen. But if you just be kind, then the door will always be open for when she's ready to leave.
And even in Illuminations, like we've got all types of healing modalities or therapists, but we are not healers. People who come to us heal themselves. We just show them how to. That's it. So even again, when it comes to advice, we just help them connect to their own advice, to their own truth that they already have, but at that moment they're struggling to get it. So we just help them focus to get their own truth, their own course of action. Because you could have 10 people going through domestic abuse and the answer to every one of them is completely different, because we're all sort of like unique in our own ways. And our job in Illuminations is to connect them with their own selves, with their own power, and to their own truth. One thing that I want to comment on as well when it comes to seeking help, if I'm in a toxic relationship, it does not make sense for me to call a friend who's also in a toxic relationship for advice. And a lot of us do that. If I'm drowning in the sea, I should ask for help from someone who's either standing on the shore, not someone who's drowning right next to me. So in seeking help, just make sure one is a person you trust and is a person who in their lives does not have their issue, because it will come from a different perspective, or seek professional support from organizations that are dedicated. And our doors in Illuminations now, we've got 3 branches, 2 in Dubai and 1 recently opened in Abu Dhabi this week, but we also provide online sessions. So a lot of people are hesitating to come into the center or hesitating to book online sessions, thinking it's not as effective. And we're telling you guys, it is as effective. So even if you're locked at home, you just have internet or a phone, that's more than enough. You can proceed with your therapy and we are here for you.
Actually, that's what Laila did to me, actually. When I remember when I went to her, she was like, I'm not going to heal you. I'm just going to lead you to the way. And once we started...
Empowering.
Yeah. Once we started, I was actually telling her about having fear of defending myself with my father. If every time I get beaten up, I never defended myself. I would just stay like this until he finishes. So there is one time I remember I went the next day to Laila and I was like, Laila, I defended myself. I pushed my father away. And I was so happy about it. So actually the healing, she's correct. I mean, she doesn't heal. She just leads you to the way to how you save yourself, to how to break the fear.
On to the second part of that question, this brings into the conversation the idea of bystander intervention, which is it's really difficult because most of us want to make some kind of move because we know fundamentally what is bad, especially if we see it in front of us, but we hesitate because we don't want to get involved and, it has a lot of repercussions. So this other question is, how do you approach a friend without prying that you think is in an abusive relationship?
Well, it's the same as what I said before, is just to open the door with kindness and let them know that you're there. And I don't think it will come across as prying if you simply ask, are you okay? You seem off today. Is someone hurting you? Is there someone in your life who is hurting you? If they say no, then they say no, and they're not ready yet.
Yeah. And would that be the same case if someone were to react defensively, meaning that they're just not ready yet?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if someone is defensive when you ask them that question, you just apologize and move on.
Okay.
Sorry, I understood. And maybe you explain, I attended this panel the other day and I learned about X, Y, and Z, and I just thought it was really interesting. And I thought it was important to let everyone know that we can talk about this, like try to destigmatize it. Because one of the questions earlier was like, how do we break the silence? And by breaking the silence requires all of us to speak up who have experienced this. Because if everyone raised their hand who had been abused at some point in their life, there'd be millions of hands raised. Because in fact, 1 in 3 women around the world will experience domestic or sexual violence at some point in their life. But nobody admits it. Nobody wants to talk about it. I have. Hadil has. I don't know about the rest of you, but that's almost 50% of this panel.
Sure.
You know?
I actually want to bring in, before I read out the other questions, I want to bring in men to this as well, because I said that we weren't going to be bashing them and saying that they are fundamentally the problem. But how are men acting in a positive way now? What experiences have you had, and what have you seen where men are taking stock of their actions and are changing for the good, and are kind of recognizing chauvinistic behavior that might seem really benign, but actually it becomes internalized and enforces normative behaviors and roles?
I mean, in my personal life and interactions with friends, with relatives, you definitely see that man role, who's the protector of the family, who's like supportive, who's like totally in peace with themselves. However, my request to those men would be, do more, reach out to the other men who are struggling. I don't see enough of that actually happening. And I always, like, in my conversations, even if it's a casual conversation with someone who I know is living the real, true masculine energy that actually does nothing but support and uplift the feminine energy. And I say, you're amazing. Why don't you do something about it? How did you get there? Why don't you talk to men? And I say it, I throw it out in personal conversations, but I really don't see enough of that happening around. I see MJ is nodding her head as well. So.
Well, I mean, to George's original question, I thought to myself, yeah, I'll let someone else answer, because like I have become a bit cynical over the years. But to be fair, there are, of course, wonderful men. I mean, I'm married. My husband's like super great. You know what I mean? But it's little things every day, like not accepting a friend who tells a sexist joke, not accepting a man next to them who's like, you know, talking about some chick last night like she's a piece of meat.
Yeah.
You know, refusing to allow it every day, refusing to allow it to creep into our society in little ways is really important. And also, again, advocating for the legislative changes, you know, like not all guys who are in charge of, you know, the legislative authorities and the GCC are bad men, but many of them are perhaps good, but just silent, and that's not okay.
Yeah.
In fact, I have an analogy that it will demonstrate what I mean, but it's about something else. So in the United States, when Trump was elected, there was this sort of commentary that was going around. And what it said was, the election of Trump proved that Americans are more sexist than they are racist, and they are really goddamn racist. Because nobody stood up. The men and the women alone did not stand up to the sexist behavior and the sexist and predatory behavior of Donald Trump. They voted for him anyway. They said, it's okay, I'm not going to speak against him.
Actually, speaking about that, there is like some people who say that justice is what becomes like when the guy goes to jail for a lifetime, or when they kill the guy for doing what he did. In my opinion, I don't think that's justice. Justice comes when it stops. It stops from the whole world. Like even any other person would feel scared to do this, or would feel that it's not okay. I'm not gonna say scared. It's a wrong impression. But justice comes when it all stops. But killing a man or being in jail for a lifetime, that doesn't help. I can tell you right now how many girls have passed away in the past few months. I know their names. I know what happened to them, because it went all over the social media. Yet they are saying, oh, we have justice, the man is in jail, and no. So I don't think that's justice. They forgot about her. There's one girl who actually, her story went all over the social media like months ago. Everyone in the world was talking about her. Now who's talking about her? And even the brothers and whoever abused her are still in jail. So that's not justice.
It does not solve the fundamental core And of course,
it's like technology is facilitating the right kind of narrative and awareness of it, but does it actually create systemic change? Does it reach that level which needs to action that fundamental change in society? I mean, I think it's a lot of trial and error right now. You know, technology can be such a force and power, a tool for power and good, but has it fundamentally moved and shifted the paradigm? I don't think so. It definitely is. It's become like an echo chamber where we can talk about it, but then we just fall silent and then move on because such is life, right? Yeah. So I want to speak to a couple of more questions before we go. Someone has asked, if you want to go out somewhere or stay out late and your parents don't allow you to go, but you do so anyway, you go out, they call the police because they know them and check on you, then follow you and then find you and then threaten you to come back home. What do you do? Wow, that's quite a loaded question.
Actually, I'm gonna tell you something. That actually happened to me once. So in this case, I had to return home. But if I'm gonna advise anyone what to do, don't go home. Stick for your opinion. Stay there. Tell them I'm not going there. Just stick. Tell them you want me to stay in the police station or whatever place that you're in. Tell them I'll stay here. But don't go home. If you're getting abused or whatever, don't go.
Again, the problem, this goes back to the legal system. Do we have the right support? We're definitely seeing this as a huge crack at the moment. So even it puts organizations like Illuminations in a difficult position because we're not a crisis response. We would work on their emotions, on them working on their courage, working on their strength, on their belief system, because we do get a lot of people who say, for example, I'm worthy of this, or like their real psyche of this is the normal, I deserve this. So we work on that and we shift it, and that makes them believe like, okay, it's not okay. Let me retrieve my courage, let me retrieve my strength, and now I can do something about it. But a question like this, at the moment, we have no real action for it. It's very unfortunate, but in some cases, actually, I do know cases from relatives where police would ask whoever the abuser is to sign something and say, I'll make sure that there's a physical distance and I will not do it again. But again, it depends who are you talking to. Right? So one person will be more supportive and will get you the forms. The other person would say, no, that's a family issue. Just go back home. It's none of my business. So unfortunately, a lot of the people who are working in these systems are reflecting their own personal beliefs onto the process as well.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of bias comes into play, but I think in a situation like this, you've got to leave the bias at the door and treat everybody and every situation with compassion and empathy as a kind of equalizer, I think. There's another question, which I think has been answered in more ways than one, but we can perhaps look at it from a different angle. How can individuals be good allies and help advocate for survivors? And then in parentheses, it says in Bahrain, during this time, would you recommend donating to a hotline, social media awareness, and volunteering?
Yeah, and yeah.
The answer is a resounding yes.
All of the above, 100%.
Yeah.
And if anyone's interested in getting involved with Shamsaha or volunteering or donating or anything, like you can find us on social media and like get in touch.
And just finally, what are the small yet effective ways that we can alter our everyday behavior to we can't eradicate the situation at the moment because it's like bigger than us, but small changes lead to bigger changes later on. One of my things that I always watch out for in myself is my language, because inevitably gender and language, they're kind of inextricably linked. I used to say things like, oh man, boys will be boys, and that kind of is problematic because then that leads to this acceptance of bad behavior and that men don't have control of their actions, and then the onus of responsibility is on us. And when I say that is women are also perpetuating that narrative by continuing this kind of discourse. So I've become a lot more cognizant of that. And, you know, even calling women certain names that are quite unsavory, even though they are common parlance and we say it in a jokey way, it's not actually a joke. So that kind of everyday change in my behavior, I feel like it makes me more woke, more aware, and just more mindful of how I am contributing to that narrative line. What do you guys do?
One thing to note, we are the mothers of the next generation. So any man who would exist 30 years from now is a result of our upbringing. So if our children, if a boy is crying, it's okay. Treat them with love, with respect. Making sure that it's okay for a boy to be upset. It's okay for him to just speak out and be emotional and be sad and dance, and it's okay. So that's like a very sort of like long-term holistic approach. But within ourselves, it's just really knowing that we deserve better, to love ourselves. The moment we love ourselves, things shift. I'll just leave it at that. Let's take care of ourselves, and we are the producers basically of the future generations. So
actually, I have something to add.
Yeah.
They always say something that when they see a strong woman, they say that she's worth 1,000 men. So they like they give men the power that they are strong. So in this case, I'm gonna change the word. She is worth 100 women, because women are more powerful. I mean, come on, they carry like a kid in their tummy for like 9 months. So that's a lot of things to do.
And MJ, what do you do on a daily basis? Well, what do you tap into? What makes you kind of aware of how are you aware of yourself, and how do you catch yourself?
So I think that all of us have insecurities that are, you know, hard to deal with. And when we allow those insecurities to thrive and feel fearful or not as good as someone next to us, that's when we sort of perpetuate these competition between women and, you know, this like not supportive behavior, right? So I came to Bahrain directly from New York. I was living in Manhattan, and I used to be really like intimidated sometimes. Like, it's a big fancy city, you know, and there's like beautiful people everywhere. And I used to sit on the train, and one by one, I would go around and look at every woman in the train, and I would give her a compliment in my head, just to force myself to not judge other women. So if we can get to the point where we stop judging each other, then we're going to be so much more powerful as a unified group.
What a humbling way to look at it. Thank you so much. This was so good. I just want to thank all of you for being here today, talking about what is very much a difficult topic, especially for Hadil, who is not only a survivor but is also going through domestic violence at the moment. And I'm wholeheartedly appreciative of you being here, and for Laila and for MJ. So thank you so much. This was such a fruitful, great chat. To the rest of you in the Invisible Auditorium, please check out the rest of our talks, which I think will be lifted onto the website in due course, if not on social media. And don't forget to use the code MKSCares to donate to the organizations. You can find all of that on mksjewellery.com. Thank you so much. Lots of love and light to all of you, and I hope quarantine is being kind to you as much as possible. Stay sane and stay safe. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for providing the platform.
Thank you.